สวัสดีครับ I'm Point from ค้นพบ Welcome to Man and War Part 2. If you haven't already, be sure to check last week's video, Part 1, where we discussed or talked about the reasons how and why man or an ordinary person like you and me can be led to do unspeakable acts, unspeakable crimes, even murder, or even going to war. And last week we talked about this topic from the perspective of psychological studies, such as those done by Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo, which showed our innate nature that has a tendency to be obedient to authority figures. In other words, we believe the man in the white coat, and we tend to follow their instructions and orders, even if it goes against our intellectual, logical understanding of what is right and wrong. And also, of course, there's a high degree of the need to conform or conformity that drives us to do acts which, on an individual level, we would know to be the wrong thing to do. Be sure to check out that video because I think it adds well to part 2, which I'm going to discuss here today. So part 2, Man and War. Today I want to talk about this topic from the perspective of understanding the nature of your ego mind. So this is what would be the wise teachers, especially from the East, the ancient mystics and sages have knew for a long time. And therefore how, in one sense, war is a result of conflict, which in turn is a result of ignorance, and therefore also the result of the ego's want for power and control, the ego's desire for power and control. The argument that I want to make in today's video is that, again, to understand war, we first have to understand the nature of conflict. And we have to backtrack again to understand the nature of how the ego mind works, which if it is ignorant and wants or pursues power and control, then these are the very mechanisms that drives a human being, a normal person, to commit unspeakable acts. Okay, so I speak about the ego a lot and talk about the ego a lot in many of my videos. But to sum it up again real quick, pretty much the ego mind comprises of your self-concept, who you think, feel, and believe that you are. Whatever it is that your mind identifies with, right? Say, for example, do you identify with a certain political opinion, political view, political party, a religious opinion, a religious view, religious belief, a certain nationality? Do you identify as being Asian, Caucasian, right? Or whatever it is. Do you identify as liking a certain sports team? Do you identify with a certain family unit? That this is my brother, that's my cousin, that's my mom, my dad, my aunt, my son, my daughter. All these things which you are attached to and which you identify with and you feel as part of who you are, this is what we can call the ego. Now, if you really think about it, the nature of the ego is actually built upon nothing but concepts. That is why the wise sages and teachers realize it to be actually nothing but an illusion in that sense. Okay. So where am I going here? The point is, the ego mind, right, when it identifies with something, with some idea, with some belief, with some concept, with some nationality, with some likes and dislikes, then the list goes on, it feels a natural sense of ownership over those things. Think about it. We use this very concept is reflected in each and every day of our lives. My car, my house, my family, my friends, my job, my nationality, my race, my gender. You notice that? You have a certain investment in these things. You identify with these things as being part of who you are. And therefore you feel a sense of ownership over it. And when you feel a sense of ownership over it, you have a need to protect it. Okay. Now I want you to notice further. I want you to notice how this mental construct of who you feel, think, and believe you are, how it is generated, how it is produced, right? And so I want to present this topic from this perspective because I think it's most tangible and perhaps the easiest way to understand it. Do you notice that those things which you identify with, which you consider to be part of who you feel, think, and believe you are, these things come from and are based off judgments, right? So, for example, when you like a certain political viewpoint, political idea, political belief, political stance, or political position, notice your liking of that stance, of that position, of that political party, of that politician. And notice how that stance, or that liking, that preference, is only based in contrast to something else which you don't like. See? Interesting, right? Notice how your attachment and identification with your family members, my dad, my mom, my sibling, my son, my daughter, my friends, my family, is only based when there is a judgment that draws a distinction between what is yours and what is other. So that person is not my family. That person is not my brother. That person is not my sister. That person is not my son, my daughter. The list goes on. Notice how this is how your mind is projecting your reality and your sense of self. Your sense of self. Okay. And notice how you are actually deeply attached to these things. Some things to a lesser extent, some things to a greater extent. For example, your preference or your like in a certain type of food or a certain type of music genre, right? You might have a smaller attachment to that, right, than say your preference for or your viewpoint of politics or of religion, your spiritual beliefs, your religious beliefs, you see? So in other words, when somebody attacks or ridicules or makes fun of the music that you like, yeah, you might not like it, but that triggers you less, that upsets you less, that makes you less angry than if they were to attack your political belief, your religious belief, your political viewpoints, your religious viewpoints. Notice that. Notice your anger that comes up. And that is a result of your mind's attempt to protect that which you identify with. So now then, notice how your entire self-concept, your sense of self, is dependent upon the protection of these things. In other words, literally, your survival depends on it. Now, this survival, I borrowed this concept from Leo Gura, another YouTuber, which I've been following for many years, from actualize.org. He explains this quite well. Your survival of your psychological self-concept it can be almost as real, if not even more real, than your physical self, right? Like, if you're under physical threat, if you have an injury, obviously you're going to react very quickly to get out of harm's way or get the treatment you need. In a similar way, when something challenges your belief systems, that which you identify with and consider as part of who you are, my favorite sports team, my political views, my religious views, and the list goes on, you will feel upset rather quickly. And that is a sign of your egoic attachment. So we must understand how the ego is connected to the need to protect those concepts, those ideas, those things. And we then need to understand and appreciate the importance of what we could call, as Leo would say, your survival agenda. Your survival agenda. It's almost as if literally your life depends on it in some way, shape, or form. So you feel a need to protect that thing. And when you need to protect some certain thing, this leads to an interesting phenomena. It leads to an interesting situation. Because sooner or later, something in reality, somebody else, somebody with a different political viewpoint, with a different religious viewpoint, from a different nationality, from a different culture, right? From a different company, from a different organization, right? Sooner or later, you're going to run into these people, and their attachments, if I may present it that way, what they identify with will come into conflict with what you identify with. And this is actually the very basis of how conflict is created. So therefore, conflict is actually not an issue or not a problem with reality itself. It is a problem with your mind and your ego's attachment, what your ego is identified with. The nature of the ego is it desires control, not self-control, but control over external factors, control over the way you think reality should be, the way life should be. For example, my son should behave this way, my daughter should not do this. My country, my government should do this, not do that. My political leader should advocate for this policy. That church leader, that monk at the temple is doing a bad job because what he or she says goes against what I believe. You see that? Notice that? Notice the conflict in your mind that arises the moment you see something or encounter something which you yourself find threatening in some way, shape, or form. So the ego that desires control and desires power. Again, control over other people, right? Their behaviors, right? How you think your country should be, how you think your community should be, how you think the world or reality should be, and the list goes on. The ego wants power and control over those things, right? To a greater or lesser extent. For most people, they're not power-hungry, dictators like Putin, but trust me, the argument I'm about to make, or the case I'm trying to make here is to get you to recognize that actually the difference between an ordinary person like you and me and somebody like a dictator or a tyrant or an authoritarian leader is actually not as far away as you would think. And the mechanisms that lead that person to commit acts of war is exactly the same mechanism that is also within you. You see? And that's the beauty of it. Again, I want to briefly sidetrack a bit, but really explain what I mean by control. What I mean by when the ego wants control. Control here is not about self-control, because self-control is an issue of self-mastery, about personal growth, right? About self-actualization, because one who has learned to truly control himself or herself, we could say, in one sense, has truly learned to master himself or herself, and therefore has mastered the art of life. That's for another topic for another day. Control here, I mean, for in this context, is about the ego's control and want and desire for power. Do you notice in yourself how perhaps you behave in some ways, some unconscious ways that you're not aware of, and therefore we call ignorance? You want your son or daughter to be a certain way, do a certain thing. Now, you may think that you love that person unconditionally, but that's actually a very big thing to claim. Because the moment their behavior deviates or changes from that which you expect, which is part of your mental model of how reality should be, of how your life should be, right? Part of your self-concept, your sense of self, part of that which you identify with. The moment your daughter, your son, your father, your mother, or your girlfriend, or your boyfriend, your wife, your husband, the moment their behavior starts to deviate from that or starts to go out of line from that which you expect, you will feel conflict right away. You will feel, and that conflict can start and express itself as feeling upset, feeling confused, feeling let down, feeling heartbroken. If they do something that is against your viewpoints or against your beliefs, for example, it can even be anger. So these feelings can show that there is an egoic attachment there, right? Having said that, do you notice how when reality does not go the way you want, when that person that you are deeply attached to, your wife, your husband, your father, your mother, your son, your daughter, your sibling, your brother, your sister, or anything like that, does something which goes against your personal viewpoints, do you notice how that disliking of it, your disliking of it, your disapproval of it, your anger, frustration, or being upset at it, is the basis or the starting point of conflict? And here's how the ego mind works. The ego mind is a very self-deceptive machine. It is very good at deluding yourself. You are very good and skillful at deluding yourself, and that's the beauty of it. Because the ego mind will find reasons, justifications, excuses to justify why your behavior, to manipulate that person, to stop that person, to change their behavior, you will feel completely justified in taking that action. Only then, or only when you can start to appreciate how your ego, your sense of self-concept, what you identify with, and your attachments, how these things drive the way you look at your reality and how you behave and how you feel upset when things don't go the way you want. Only when you start to appreciate this mechanism can you truly start to appreciate and understand the nature of conflict. And then the next question would be, well then, okay, you might see what I'm trying to say here, but how does that different, or how does that differ, or how is it different from, say, war? I mean, from small levels of conflict, which, okay, we all have in our daily lives, that is nothing compared to war. Actually, it is not as far away as you would think. Because an ego mind that has successfully deceived itself, in other words, if you're able to successfully deceive yourself, and if you buy into excuses, justifications, and all the reasons why you are right and they are wrong, this road is actually can lead to the development of ideological beliefs. You see, one way to look at it is a weak mind, right? Somebody who has a big ego or a strong ego, we could consider, has a weak mind. They have poor or weak emotional self-awareness skills, emotional self-control skills, and they tend to get upset at things quite easily when things don't go the way that they want. Have you ever noticed this? So a weak mind is prone to dogmatic belief systems, ideologies, conspiracy theories, is prone to a very what word should I use? I'm trying to use the right word here. For lack of a better term, is very prone to the addictions of these dangerous belief systems like dogma, ideology, conspiracy theories, because these belief systems serve to strengthen the ego, because these belief systems ultimately are predicated upon demonizing something else or somebody else. In other words, you create a false enemy if you have a weak mind, and you feel completely justified in doing so. To a weak mind, it makes you feel heroic. It makes you feel, in a very twisted way, it makes you feel self-righteous. And that is a danger. And if you really begin to appreciate how your ego mind works, then you'll understand that this path is actually not that far away from small everyday things. Disliking somebody who has a different opinion than you. Disliking the way, the choice that your son or daughter chooses in their studies or in their line of work. The choices that your neighboring country is making, competing for the same resources that your country is trying to claim as theirs. See those things? Do you notice how this very mechanism is nothing more than a projection of the human ego mind? Again, therefore, it is not that the problem or the conflict lies in reality itself, because reality just is. The problem lies in your perception of reality and the quarrels or the problems that you create based on your own dislikings, based on your own judgments, based on feeling completely justified in thinking the way you do, believing what you believe, and taking the necessary action to eliminate that threat. And what we see here in many conflicts around the globe throughout history and in the current day and age, in the example here, Ukraine and Russia. For example, let's take Putin, right? Nobody really knows what's going on in his mind, but there is a good argument that could be made that he is also driven this invasion of Ukraine, his decision to invade Ukraine, is a very good argument could be made that it is driven by his ideology, that Ukraine is actually part of Russia, used to be part of Russia. You see that? You see how that belief systems, which comes from his egoic projections, is leading him to feel completely justified to take whatever action is necessary, commit whatever atrocities or murders is necessary to achieve his goal. And he can still believe that he is the hero in doing so. And that is the twisted truth or the very interesting mechanism in how the human mind works, on how the ego works. So as the wise teachers and wise sages would say throughout the ages, conflict is something to be overcome from within. And if you're not consistently or not putting in effort to work on your conscious development, on your self-awareness, self-understanding, then your ignorance will drive you to do behaviors that cause harm and suffering for yourself and other people as well. And this is the nature of conflict and the nature of suffering as well. So again, to recap real quick, to understand war, we have to first understand the nature of conflict and how that actually ties to your ego mind, right? Which has an investment or identification or attachment to or a sense of self-concept that is tied to certain things, ideas, people, you name it, the list goes on. And it needs to protect these things. And we are 7 billion people, almost 8 billion people on this planet. Sooner or later, two of these egos will come into conflict, clash with each other. To truly understand another person, therefore, is the process of truly understanding yourself first. Your mind, your own anger, your own frustration, your own judgments, your own hatred, how you demonize other people, how you demonize other ideas, how you demonize other positions, other beliefs, how you judge people, how you label people, how you feel completely justified in destroying that which you view as a threat, and how you don't even blink an eye, how you don't even consider or reflect on your actions. And that is how the self-deception mechanism works. And that is why many wise teachers, if not all wise teachers, actually all wise teachers, would say and would advocate that the best thing you can do in your life is learn to master yourself. Overcome your own ignorance. Overcome your own fears, insecurities. Overcome your own desire for power and control. But as Carl Jung would say, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will continue to drive your life, and you will call it fate. I'm paraphrasing. I don't think he said that exactly, but if I remember the quote correctly, it goes something along the lines of, Carl Jung once said something along the lines of, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will continue to drive your life, and you will call it fate. So to truly master conflict, to truly overcome conflict, you must first master yourself. Now, this is not to say to not take action, right? Of course, the situation in Ukraine right now is very tragic. And I'm sure our hearts go out to them. The people suffering, both the Ukrainians and the Russians, who have no want or no interest or no desire to be part of this war. Sorry about that just now. The camera got cut off because I've been speaking too long or recording too long. Anyways, I think where I left off just now was, as I was saying, I'm not saying this as a way to downplay or brush off the tragedy that is going on now. Our hearts go out to the people who are suffering as a result of this war, led by one leader who's lost his mind, perhaps, Putin, right? But the thing is, to truly understand conflict, we must first see it within us. That's what I'm trying to say. To truly master and deal with conflict, we must first master and deal with ourselves. I'm not saying this is an easy thing. And also, I'm not saying that we shouldn't take action, right? I'm not saying for the Ukrainians to just sit there and welcome the invasion. Certainly, if I was in that situation, I would not just sit there and do nothing. But the point is, right, action must come from a place of a conscious level of understanding. It must come from a place of wisdom. It must come from a place of self-awareness and understanding and compassion. Because if you can understand your own egoic survival needs, then you can also understand the other person's egoic survival needs. And that helps you to be mindful and no longer need to demonize the other person, but just take action as needed and do it to the best of your ability. Again, I'm not saying this is going to be easy, and I'm not saying that that anybody can just simply do this, or that I'm at that level yet myself. I've certainly got a lot more work to do as well. But I put this out there as an invitation for us all to walk this path and to really have in mind how we can learn to master ourselves first, how we can learn to be self-aware of the conflict within. That starts within. And if you want to live in a peaceful world, you must first learn to be peaceful and loving yourself, right? And that's the whole point. And yes, so I wanted to end the clip there. Thank you very much for watching. Today's video. Stay tuned for next week, because I want to continue on this topic and talk about part 3 and share some ideas or some practices that we can begin to do to learn to be more at peace from within first. Right? Hope you stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time. สวัสดีครับ